Welcome to Episode 3 of The Review Crew, a brand new show on IGN where we invite folks from all over the gaming community to chat with us about the biggest reviews. This week's game is Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and fair warning, we do discuss some very minor story spoilers in this episode. So if you're worried about that kind of thing, go finish the game and then come back here to check out our conversation. I'm your host, Zach Ryan, and this week my crew consists of Jonathan Dornbush, Senior News Editor at IGN, Alexis Ned, Senior Entertainment Reporter at Mashable, and Blessing Adeoye Jr., host and producer at Kinda Funny Games. We're opening this week's episode by throwing nuance right out the window and getting down to business. I want to talk a little bit about the best part and the worst part of this game in a segment that I cleverly call Best and Worst.
And that's the bingo!
Blue screen of death.
So panel, tell me what you think is the best part and the worst part of Spider-Man Miles Morales. Alexis, can we start with you?
The best part for me is Miles himself. He's so charming. I love the way he talks to his mom, to his friends. I like playing with him. I like hanging out with him. He's my son, and he's adorable, and I love him. The worst part for me is the suit that Peter gives him in the beginning of the game as a Christmas present. It's hideous. I couldn't wait to get rid of it, and it's like the long blue hot dog dealio, and I don't know why any Spider-Man would want that to be his vibe when crime around the city. It's just not cute.
I petition that we call it the blue hot dog suit moving forward.
Hot dog suit.
So
I'll take it.
Jonathan, best and worst?
Best for me, I think, would be I used to live in New York, and so being able to have New York at Christmas time, which was one of my favorite seasons in New York, is just such a fun, nostalgia-driven environment to be in. Like, it's very much the idealized viewpoint I think a lot of people have of New York is New York at Christmas, and so this very much is like the idealized version. Like, I'm not trudging through muddy snow that's been on the sidewalk for 3 days and also smells like garbage, but it's the nice version that you fondly remember when you're gone from it. So I loved being able to be around in that and being able to, see the tree and all the window displays and all of that. Worst, I think a lot of my worsts would probably be nitpicky stuff, but one thing that I wish they had fixed that they didn't from the first game is that the podcasts that will play, whether it's the DanaCast or Jay Jonah's, will still just cut off so much the second you go do anything else, and they don't really pick back up. So you have to go back into the menu to replay those. And I find the writing in those really funny and clever a lot of the time. So, but I don't want to just sit in the menu to listen. So maybe that's something they'll patch, but for me, it was just kind of one of those, like, the audio just would keep cutting out because I'd run into a crime or something. And it seems like that breaks up the flow.
Seems like they should pick up a note from like God of War in their ability to like pick up a story where it left off or something along those lines in the podcast. Blessing, what about you? What is the best and worst part of Miles Morales?
As far as best, I'd say the actual character of Miles, I think, is really, really likable and really well fleshed out. The way in which they build Miles's character and give him personality and make him his own person and separate him from Peter in that way, I think is really special and really well done. As far as worst thing, that's I'd say some of the parts of the story that I don't like remind me of parts of Marvel movies that I don't like. Like, I feel like the story can get Marvel movie-ish in certain points, in like the bad way, in terms of, all right, like, I like the villain, but there are certain things about some of the villain characters that I wish were more fleshed out, or I wish toward the second half of the game the story was had a little bit more room to breathe, which I think kind of comes back to the length of it, which I think is good and works, but at the same time, I think I wish the story kind of fit into its own length a bit, if that makes sense.
I'm going to take it all the way back, and I want to start the whole conversation by talking a little bit about your reviews. If each of you could just give me a quick overview of your impressions, your thoughts on the game at large. If you scored it, give it what was your score, that kind of thing. Jonathan, can we start with you?
So yeah, I scored it. I gave it a 9, which is amazing on the IGN scale. I really, really adored this game. I had also reviewed Marvel's Spider-Man back in 2018 and gave that an 8.7 back when we had a 100-point review scale. And for me, it was a lot of... I thought about this review score couched in that one because this is one of those unique opportunities where I'm continuing along in a franchise. And for me, I loved the first game and I adored it, and thought they did so much great character work and establishing the series. But a lot of the open world stuff gave me open world fatigue. It was a lot of the, do 100 crimes, collect 70 tokens. There were fun things to do in that city as you explored, but it often was just duplicated over and over and over again. Here, I loved the character development, as everyone's been saying with Miles. I think the additions to combat work super well. They're so flashy and fun and just add variety to everything. And I really appreciated how it built on the foundation of the first game, but just magnified everything and improved on stuff in so many ways.
Right on. Jonathan, I appreciate you coming in here and reading your entire review for us at the beginning.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Alexis, what about you? How's your review for Mashable?
Are you sure he just read his? Because it sounds like he also just read mine. That's exactly what I thought about it too. We do not score at Mashable,
right.
But I did give it a very good review for a lot of the same things Jonathan was just saying. I did like maybe 5 hours in the old SpiderMan as like a ramp up to this one. So I was like, gotta get my muscle memory back, gotta remember how to. And when that open world, like when you first see the map and it's fogged up and you just know it's going to be covered in collectibles, I was like, that's why this game took me forever to finish. So when I got to Miles and the map was automatically unfogged, you're not relearning too many of the combat stuff. Everything is, here is the baseline set by Marvel's Spider-Man, and we're going to turn it up to 11 for Miles. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for not only taking the character himself and making him like the actual genuine focus, because there's definitely an alternate version of this game where it's like, and he's fighting beside Peter for the entire time. So like, thank you for giving Miles the actual spotlight in this game and for using his character to improve upon elements of that first game. What else did I say in my review? I mean, I did focus a lot of my review also on Miles himself, the character who I keep bringing up, just because as a Black Puerto Rican whose family comes from Spanish Harlem, if something was wrong in this game, I would have noticed. And they put so much effort into having these small details that it made me realize how much they cared. And it made me care so much more because I'm like, I really appreciate your effort. I see you. You see me and I see you. This never happens in video games.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about the representation in this game, which I think is super, super strong. And we're going to talk a lot about Miles throughout the course of the next several minutes. But before that, I did want to get to Blessing's review for Kind of Funny. Blessing, tell me about your review, your impressions of Miles.
Oh man, I hated it. So for Kind of Funny, we also don't do scored reviews. We do reviews in podcast form. And so like my review is basically talking it out with Greg over at Kind of Funny. And I guess the way I'd sum up how I felt about the game coming out of it was, I really liked it for the reasons I think you guys all said, right? Like it feels like it learned a lot of lessons coming out of Spider-Man 2018. I thought all that stuff was done really well. There are certain parts of it that had me a little bit more conflicted in terms of it being this pseudo sequel to Spider-Man 2018, but not like the full sequel. I felt like the shorter length, even though a good idea and in the best case scenario would have been the best thing for this game, I feel like in some instances the game felt a little bit limited for me in ways that the open world stuff kind of felt more pared down. The story I feel like didn't have enough time to breathe in some cases, and like there are certain points where I felt like it could be so much more, especially coming out of Spider-Man 2018, which was one of my favorite games of this entire generation. Spider-Man Miles Morales coming out as a follow-up to that, I felt kind of lived in the shadow of both 2018 Spider-Man, but then also Into the Spider-Verse, which was introduction for so many of us to the Miles Morales' character in that style. And so that stuff kind of took away from the experience a little bit for me, and all that kind of comes back to expectation and not necessarily the game itself. The game itself, I think, is great, fantastic. Of course, if you're coming from Spider-Man 2018 and you like that game, you're gonna like Miles Morales. That said, I still love the game. I still think the game's great.
So I do want to talk about this game as an iteration on Spider-Man 2018. I feel like the early messaging around this game was a little bit bungled and left people sort of confused about what to expect. And this kind of goes into what Blessing was talking about in his review about expectation, right? Like there was so much confusion about, is this DLC? Is this an Uncharted Legacy style standalone thing? Is it a full blown sequel? All of these things sort of were questions at the beginning of this game's story. And Alexis' review points out that it is all of those things. It is sort of a side story and it is sort of a sequel. I want to talk further about this iteration, this idea of like a pseudo sequel to Spider-Man 2018. And I want to start with Jonathan. Your review says, it earns a spot as a fantastic follow-up to telling a wonderful Miles-specific story while improving upon the fundamentals of the first game and distinctive moves and enemies. Can you say a little bit more about that in terms of an iterative sequel for Spider-Man?
Yeah, I think for me, it's one of those things where I think the point that you make that it is all of these things at once holds true in that I do think there is a world where a full-fledged sequel, if we want to use that language, could have been made with Miles as the focus and had the amount and wealth of content that Spider-Man 1 had. But I think for me, why I love this game so much is that at the end of the day, especially having gone back to play Remastered a bit, a lot of that side content feels more superfluous than everything here. And I don't want to go into any spoilers of things, but I would always rather take a smaller game that has more meaningful content than an overcrowded game that just has content to have content. So I feel like it does, I think, earn that 1.5 moniker, which is both frustrating, but I also like the flexibility there for a game that is of this caliber and this well made and this high production value. Doesn't have to be something that is 30 hours long and then has 40 other, or not 40, but like 20 other hours of side content on it. I think it uses the space, the amount of content it has well. Personally, I think it lives in that space well, even if it does mean the map of New York is a little bit emptier.
For me, it didn't feel as much of, it's not a story follow-up to the original Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is in it for 2 minutes. It is both a sequel in that some characters, you see their plot lines going. Like you know more about what Howard and his pigeons are doing now than we do about what Peter was doing the whole time.
I miss those pigeons. It's nice to see them again.
They've turned to a life of crime.
It's terrifying.
It's a sequel in the timeline, but it's a spin-off in that Peter Parker is almost irrelevant except for his impact on Miles, our main character. And the Miles' story is so well done because you get to see someone who was a fan of Spider-Man in the first game, like we are, find out that he is also now Spider-Man. And just in the first couple months of his journey, there's a point in the game where Genki says, whenever you say Spider-Man, you're talking about the other guy. You were Spider-Man. Yeah. And watching Miles as a character have that journey where when he says Spider-Man, he talks about himself. I'm like, that is a spinoff. That is a whole new story. I love his growth and how he gets to that moment.
I promise to do everything in my power to protect this city.
I promise.
You know, jumping into Spider-Man 2018 and having this fresh feeling of the first time swinging around as Spider-Man and Peter Parker in the Insomniac's universe, and the first time getting into combat, the first time exploring New York. And like, even though in Miles Morales, a lot of that stuff was streamlined, doing all that stuff for the first time in Spider-Man 2018 felt new, fresh, and special to me in a way where Miles Morales is kind of set up at a disadvantage for what it is, right? Like, I don't necessarily have to go through those same motions of discovering what it means to play a modern Spider-Man game. So that coupled with the like mechanically the combat being same but different, which it gets complicated because you kind of have to like grind it down all the way and like really pick apart. And I feel like I'm gonna end up being nitpicky, but you know, I love the Venom stuff, but a lot of the combos that I did as Miles still felt like Peter Parker-ish combos. And I guess like at a certain point it's Spider-Man. So what are you going to do? Like, he's going to do his web stuff. He's going to like uppercut people in the air and get in the air combat and do all that stuff. But
yeah, I have a few nitpicks that you know we'll get to, I'm sure, down the line. But I am glad that you brought up the combat, because I do want to talk a little bit about sort of the nuts and bolts mechanics of this game versus Spider-Man 2018. you know, outside of iteration, I think each of you talked about the way that this game streamlines things like gadgets, but also adds additional things to combat options and stealth options to really set itself apart from Spider-Man 2018 in a few different ways. Alexis, I really like this line in your review. You said that one of the smarter choices Spider-Man Miles Morales makes is expanding upon instead of rewriting some of the first game's success. The skill tree in this game branches out to cover what Peter couldn't teach him, namely how to use his Miles-specific special powers. What is it about the combat? What is it about the Venom powers to you that stood out versus Spider-Man 2018? I mean, obviously, the biggest standout is that they weren't in that first game. But,
yeah, is that they pretty much that they exist. I mean, I
Right.
think I really get what Blessing is saying, and that like when you do boil it down, a lot of it is the same stuff that we had in Spider-Man 2018. I was just happy that there was enough of the stuff we had in 2018, so we didn't have to redo it and like re-earn the skills. I did wonder before I started playing it. I'm like, how are they going to deal with like a skill tree in this game if it's Spider-Man again? What are we going to do? So I like the fact that they solved that problem by having it be, you can do all the normal Spider-Man stuff, but this is bioelectric visible Spider-Man. And for me, it was almost like a hat tip to Miles being like, you're actually kind of a cooler Spider-Man than Peter is, because you have his skill tree and you have your own skill tree that Spider-Man can't even touch. There's a point in the game where Pete's like, I'm a little jealous that you have bioelectric powers. I'm like, yeah, you should be. Your protege rocks. Like, he's going to be able to kick your butt one day because you can't shock people with your body.
I don't think there's any debate that Miles is like infinitely cooler than Peter.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in every direction.
Yeah, just like a much cooler dude all around.
Back the hell.
Similarly, Jonathan, you talked about the way that Venom attacks work, and basic attacks not only saved you in the midst of a packed battle, but also adds a lot of stylish flair and variety to how you approach brawls. How is your approach different in this game versus 2018?
I think my approach with Miles, what really changed was I felt like I was using more of his arsenal, in part because there was less of it, but because all of those parts that were there were more interesting to me. Like, especially going back and playing Remastered, I use so little of the options they give Peter. But with Miles, I loved using the Venom attacks, especially as they multiplied, because one, the way they look is just so cool, but it felt like it made the combat pace a little bit differently, battle to battle. And again, like, there are less enemy types in this game and there are less moves at the end of the day, but I found each one of them more valuable. I was finding myself using different combos in different ways more often than I did in the first game.
Yeah, I think overall this game has a better flow. I think it integrates its systems with each other a little bit more fluidly, and that definitely lends to some pretty spectacular just spectacular moves, both visually and, you know, mechanically. I think it does some really cool stuff there.
Precious moments. You gotta capture them.
Shouldn't we wait for Miles?
No, he hates photos. All right, everyone squeeze in. Ready? Great photo, great photo.
We've talked so much about Miles already, but like I would be remiss if I didn't dedicate at least some small segment to Miles as a character in and of himself. Blessing, you mentioned early on that the game still kind of lives in the shadow of Spider-Man 2018 and Into the Spider-Verse, and that you would love Miles Morales if you hadn't gotten those other two things first. I totally understand what you're saying in respect to like the bigger Miles Morales universe, but can you talk a little bit about just Miles Morales as a character in this game specifically?
Oh yeah, dude,
And
I
how you
absolutely
feel
love
about
him. Like you mentioned the scene at the fair, right? And like the and this might even be even more like a PS5 from PS4 upgrade thing, but like seeing him in his coat and like the fur and like his hair and the lighting, and I'm like, yeah, this is a cool character. I like this guy, right? And like, you know, when you zoom in and things as simple as just like his hairline, right? Where like if you look at comparisons between Spider-Man 2018 on PS4 and Spider-Man Miles Morales, and like look at the hair, I'm still used to in video games black hair not being depicted as great, especially when it comes to either like customized characters or even proper actual characters in games. Like I don't know if it's the technology or what, but that stuff has never felt like there's been love put into it. And Miles Morales, it looks incredible. Like there's like the texture there. It looks like he went to an actual barber instead of like it just like growing, right? It's awesome. But yeah, beyond
he looked busted in 2018. Though.
Looks so busted.
the hairline in 2018 was a hate crime.
And like maybe he needed to move to Harlem from Brooklyn. Like maybe those barbers there. Maybe that's what
just better barbers out there.
Yeah.
Well, you were tweeting about that too, Blessing. Like I saw when that trailer first dropped, or one of the early Miles trailers, you had tweeted like a tight crop picture on Miles' head when he's on the subway, and you're like, you had said something about how you like it made you feel seen, or like it's like we're really feeling the power of next gen or something like in that moment. And I thought that was super cool because like, yeah, that is a really cool thing to see in a next gen game.
Exactly. It's super awesome. But yeah, even beyond that, the fact that Miles is a character that makes beats, like I don't think there's been a time I felt more seen by a main character in a game than Miles Morales, because there's so many times where he'd say something and I'd be like, that's me, I do that. Like, yeah, him going around the town collecting samples, right, and doing that portion of side quests, like that's such a cool, very unique thing to have Spider-Man do in a way that connects to his actual character, right? Like him sampling things in order to put them into beats. That's really awesome. But then beyond that, right, like his relationship with Genki, his relationship with his mom, and all the other characters that are present in the game, like they do such a good job of making each of those relationships unique while also giving them stakes, or giving them a role in the story that goes beyond just hey, this is my mom and like I can talk to her sometimes, right? Or this is Genki and like he's my friend, and then we move on. It's like every single one of those pieces that are placed in the story have an important or dynamic role in the actual story that connects back to Miles and possibly Spider-Man in some way that I think is very well done and really cool.
Yeah, it's funny, like you said that, and the next quote that I have lined up here is from Jonathan's review. He talks about exactly that. He says that Miles is fallible because he's so new to the gig, and the story doesn't shy away from his mistakes, like how his interactions with a personal friend can have big ramifications for his super alter ego. But it is continuously showing you how working towards something better is a process, and one that is stronger when built on trust and community. Dornbush, like I really love this quote from your review, and I feel like it's kind of at the crux of what I really love about Miles as a character, in that he is, he does make mistakes, he does get things wrong. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of his character arc over the course of this game?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, and especially sort of similar to Blessing, like coming from knowing the character from Into the Spider-Verse, like I'd known of him before that, but that's really, I think, like the most beloved piece of Miles storytelling. I found that the in here that made Insomniac's take feel fresh but true to the what I know of the character is how much it relates him to the world around him. Like it is, and especially revisiting Spider-Man 2018, I think, like Peter's relationship with MJ in that game is fantastic, and his mentorship with Otto works really well. But here I felt like I know who Miles is as a part of his family. I know who he is as a part of a community and a neighborhood. I know who he is as a best friend to Genki. I know who he is in his relationships when it comes to his school life to a certain extent. Like I learned so much about Miles throughout the course of this game. And like both of you have been saying, it all rings true and it all earns its place and it all feels important to the story. It doesn't feel like things are just thrown in there to be like, well, we also have his family there. It's like, no, his relationship to his mom really matters. And I loved that it was able to keep bringing all those things back into the story, and the way those things interact with one another. I don't want to get into spoilers, obviously, but the way those different threads come together, just made me fall in love with this character more and more throughout it. Like I love Peter. I've grown up with Peter Parker. I've had 3 versions of Peter in movies. I've had this versions in games. Like in this universe right now, I am so much more excited to see what happens with Miles, honestly, than with Peter.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about it earlier, in that Miles is like such a cooler character, but he also is it sounds cliche to say, but he also has so much more heart. Like I feel like this game compared to the first Spider-Man just has so much more heart and so much more warmth. And I think that is what really has made this game so special to me and why I enjoyed it as much as I did.
Right, messing with the underground.
We are running out of time, so I do want to get into the lightning round. That's when I put 12 questions out to my panel, rapid fire, and have them answer as quickly as possible. Alexis, I want to start with you. What is the best suit in the game, and why is it the Spider-Cat suit?
Oh, okay, Spider-Cat suit is incredible, but the best suit in the game is the Into the Spider-Verse suit. Animate on twos.
Blessing, is Miles Morales a Game of the Year contender?
I'm gonna say no, just because it's a very strong year. It's close though.
Okay.
Maybe it feels
Right.
last year. Yes. This year, I'm gonna say no.
Okay. Dornbush, you reviewed 4 PlayStation 5 games at launch. What's one big takeaway from spending that much time with a nearly complete launch lineup?
That we went into launch kind of being like, hey, it's not that light because there's so many games that are cross-gen or whatnot, or it's a lot of games where you get free upgrades. There's a lot of really great stuff, and it looks so pretty on PS5. Like, it's not the jump from PS2 to PS3, sure, when HD was introduced, but man, does playing Spider-Man Miles Morales and even the remastered Spider-Man with ray tracing on, with 60 frame per second mode, like it makes a difference, and it's beautiful. Like it's really fun to have next gen here.
Alexis, does Insomniac do another Spider-Man game after this, or do they try something new?
Give me more Miles. I got 13 hours with him. Give me a big one.
Blessing, at one point in the game, Peter calls Miles and says, "Hey, I just landed in Europe." That's weird, right? Like, why doesn't he say something more specific? Like, where is he?
Oh, he's far from home, you know?
Hey.
Alexis, you can only choose one Spider-Man power for everyday use in real life. Which power do you choose?
Do I get Miles power too?
Sure, yeah.
Invisibility, camouflage. Do you know how much stuff I could steal?
All right. Jonathan, what's another superhero that you'd like to see Insomniac tackle?
Ooh, Insomniac specifically. Trying to think of someone who has a lot of
There's a
gadgets.
right answer.
Well, now you're putting me on the spot. Who is your right answer? Now I need
The
to
right
know.
answer is Black Panther.
Okay, yeah, I would
That's a
take
good
that
one.
in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I would see them. I've seen a lot of people ask for it, and I would totally be down to see them do a Daredevil game as well.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Mhm.
Just knowing how good their like combat can be.
There are two
I
right
think-
answers.
And they can keep the map.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Blessing, last question to you. Does Miles get his own full game after Spider-Man 2?
Ooh, I would love for him to. I'm gonna say yes. Make Spider-Man after 2.5 an actual full-fledged 3. Why not? Round up.
Okay. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of the Review Crew. We are out of time, but I do want to take a moment to have each of you promote your stuff. Tell us where we can find you. Tell us what you're working on or what you're playing next. Jonathan, let's start with you.
Oh, I am currently. What am I doing? I did so much for the launch of the PS5, so go check out any of that. If you missed any of it, I reviewed Miles Morales, Spider-Man Remastered, The Pathless, and Astro's Playroom. So did reviews for all of those, and we also, just for Podcast Beyond, our weekly PlayStation show, we did a couple episodes about launch and some of the launch issues and launch games, but also we did a spoiler cast with Brian Horton, who was the creative director for Miles Morales. So that was a really fun chat.
Alexis, what about you?
You can find me on Twitter at Alexis the Ned, Nedd, or you can read my writing on Mashable.com. While we're plugging, though, I was just able to show the cover art for my YA novel, which is coming out next
nice.
year on July 1st. It's called Don't Hate the Player, and it's kind of a romance set in the world of esports with some
I'm reading that. That's
cool
awesome.
teens that play some games.
That sounds great. Congratulations. That's really,
Thank
really
you.
cool. Blessing, what about you?
I am on twitter.com with the username @BlessingJr. That's @BlessingJR. I also make content for youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. I'm on Kind of Funny Games daily every day. And people specifically should go check out our Spider-Man Miles Morales spoiler cast that we recorded with Brian Horton, the creative director. And if you want to get to that easily, you can go to kindoffunny.com/miles.
Thank you to my guests, Alexis, Jonathan, and Blessing for joining me today to talk about Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and thank you at home for watching. Each week, we're bringing you a fresh cast from around the gaming world to talk about the biggest reviews. Don't forget, you can catch our full, uncut chat in the audio podcast version of the review crew on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast services. We'll be back next Monday to talk about the PlayStation 5 with IGN's Luke Riley, Spawn on Me's Khalif Adams, and Polygon's Chelsea Stark. Until then, stay safe, stay smart, and keep it locked to IGN.